Hey guys, tonight we are writing in light. The world outside is dark and illiterate, but inside these walls, we are preserving the soul of civilization. We are joining the Medieval Illuminator. We are going to paint the words that will outlast kings and castles. This is a story about patience, chemistry, and the color of gold. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Now, hear the scratch of the quill, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Scriptorium is the only warm room in the entire monastery. Not warm like summer, but warm enough that your fingers can still move, warm enough that the ink won't freeze in its horn, warm enough that the vellum won't crack when you fold it. The heat comes from a single brazier, carefully tended, positioned in the center of the room where 6 desks surround it like petals around a stamen. The brazier glows with a deep orange light, the coals breathing quietly, exhaling their warmth into the cold stone air. You can hear them sometimes, these coals, a soft hiss or pop when a pocket of sap ignites in the cherry wood, but mostly there is silence, absolute silence. The walls are thick, stone upon stone upon stone, mortared with lime and sand, built to hold back the wind that screams across the moors outside. The windows are small, barely wider than your hand, set deep into the wall so that the light comes in at an angle, concentrated precious. In winter, these windows are covered with old linen, translucent enough to let in the pale daylight, but thick enough to keep out the killing cold. The light that enters is diffused, softened, like light filtered through milk. It falls across the desks in gentle bars, illuminating the dust motes that drift endlessly through the air, tiny galaxies turning in the stillness. The smell is what you notice first when you enter the scriptorium. It is a layered smell, complex, built up over years of the same work repeated endlessly. At the foundation is the smell of old skin, the vellum that covers every surface, stacked in piles, stretched on frames, rolled in scrolls. It smells faintly sweet, faintly animal, like walking into a tannery but cleaner, more refined. Over this is the sharp bite of vinegar, used to clean the quills, to adjust the ink, to wipe the mistakes from the page. And then there is the iron smell of the gall ink itself, metallic and astringent, mixed with the yeasty warmth of the wine that forms its base. Beneath all of this, so subtle you might not notice it at first, is the scent of beeswax from the candles, honey-sweet and golden, and the mineral dust of ground pigments, chalk and ochre and lapis lazuli, each with its own ghost of a scent. You take your place at one of the desks. It is a slanted surface, angled to catch the light, to position the work at the perfect distance from your eyes, to let your hand rest naturally as you write. The desk is old, the wood worn smooth by decades of sleeves sliding across it, of hands resting on its edges. The surface is oak, dark and dense, marked with tiny stains where ink has soaked in over the years, creating a constellation of black spots that no amount of scrubbing can remove. These stains are the history of the room, each one a moment when someone's hand slipped, when concentration faltered, when the work became real enough to leave its mark. The silence in the scriptorium is not empty. It is full, full of concentration, full of breath held and released, full of the tiny sounds that work makes. The scratch of quill on vellum, like a mouse in straw, constant and rhythmic. The soft creak of the wooden desk when you shift your weight. The rustle of your robe as you reach for a new sheet. The quiet tap of the pumice stone being set down. These sounds do not break the silence. They deepen it, they prove it, they make it more complete. Outside these walls, the world is chaos. Armies march across muddy fields. Plagues move from village to village like wind through grass. Kings rise and fall. Harvests succeed or fail. Children are born and grow old and die. But inside the scriptorium, time moves differently. Here, time is measured in pages completed, in books bound, in the slow accumulation of words copied from ancient texts. Here, we are building something that will outlast the chaos. We are building permanence. Before you can write a single word, before you can dip a quill into ink, before you can even think about the delicate work of illumination that will come later, you must prepare the vellum. This is where everything begins. This is the foundation upon which all the beauty will rest. Paper does not exist yet. Not here, not in this part of the world, not in this century. Paper is a rumor from the East, a strange substance made from rags and wood pulp, thin and fragile and cheap. We do not work with paper. We work with skin. The vellum comes from calves, usually, though sometimes from sheep or goats, depending on what the monastery can afford, what the season has provided. The calfskin is best. It is smoother, more consistent, with fewer blemishes and scars. A calf that has lived only a few months has skin that is tender, fine-grained, perfect for accepting ink. The skin arrives at the monastery, already removed from the animal, already salted to prevent decay, but still raw, still covered in hair, still recognizably the skin of a living creature. The parchmenter works in a separate room, a cold room, because the work of preparing vellum requires water, endless amounts of cold water, and you cannot do this work near the warmth of the scriptorium. You visit this room to watch the process, to understand where your materials come from, to respect the transformation that must occur before skin becomes a page. The parchmenter is a specialist, his hands perpetually white and wrinkled from being submerged in water for hours each day. He works at a large stone basin, cold water flowing in from a channel that connects to the monastery's well. The first step is to soak the salted skin, to rehydrate it, to wash away the salt and any dried blood that remains. The skin goes into the water stiff and curved, trying to hold the shape of the animal it once covered. But slowly, over hours, it relaxes, it uncurls, it becomes flat and soft. After soaking, the skin must be limed. There is a separate vat for this, filled with a solution of slaked lime and water, thick and white and caustic. The lime is made by burning limestone in a kiln, then mixing the resulting quicklime with water, a process that generates heat, that hisses and steams, that must be done carefully to avoid burns. The lime solution is alkaline, powerful enough to dissolve the hair, to loosen the grain of the skin, to begin the transformation from hide to parchment. The skin stays in the lime for days, sometimes more than a week, depending on its thickness, its quality, the temperature of the water. The parchmenter checks it regularly, reaching into the white liquid with his bare hands, feeling the texture, testing to see if the hair is ready to come off. When it is ready, he drapes the skin over a rounded wooden beam, curved like a horse's back, and begins to scrape. The scraping knife is a curved blade, held in both hands, pushed away from the body in long, even strokes. The parchmenter positions himself behind the beam, the skin stretched over the curve, and begins to push the knife across the surface. The hair comes off in clumps, dark and wet, sliding off the skin in tangles. Underneath, the skin is pale, almost white, but still thick, still too coarse to write on. This is just the beginning. After the hair is removed from one side, the skin is flipped, and the process repeats on the flesh side. Here, the knife removes not hair but the thin layer of fat and membrane that clings to the inner surface. This work requires more precision, more delicacy, because it is easy to cut too deep, to create a weak spot that will later tear. The parchmenter's hands move in a rhythm, scrape and pause, the blade singing a quiet note against the wet skin. When both sides are scraped clean, the skin is rinsed again, washed free of lime and hair and loosened tissue, and then comes the most crucial step, the stretching. A wooden frame is prepared, rectangular, slightly larger than the skin itself, with pegs driven into the edges. The wet skin is laid over the frame, and lengths of twisted cord are attached to the edges of the skin, looped around the pegs. The parchmenter begins to tighten these cords slowly, evenly, pulling the skin taut in all directions at once. The skin resists at first. It wants to remain loose, to curl back into itself, to remember the shape it once held. But the parchmenter is patient. He tightens each cord a little bit, then moves to the next, working around the frame, applying pressure gradually, giving the skin time to adjust. As the skin stretches, you can see it change. It becomes thinner, more translucent. The fibers align, the texture smooths. It begins to look less like skin and more like something else, something in between, not quite animal anymore, but not yet ready to receive words. The frame with the stretched skin is left to dry, sometimes in the sun if the weather permits, sometimes in a dry room if it does not. As the skin dries, it tightens further, drum tight, singing slightly when tapped. The drying must be slow, controlled, because if it happens too quickly, the skin will become brittle, prone to cracking. The parchmenter checks it throughout the day, adjusting the tension of the cords, ensuring that the pull is even, that no part of the skin is stressed more than another. When the skin is fully dry, it is removed from the frame, but the work is not done. Not yet. The surface is still too rough, still marked with tiny imperfections, still bearing the memory of the animal it once was. Now comes the pumice stone. The pumice is volcanic glass, light and porous, filled with tiny holes that make it abrasive without being destructive. The parchmenter selects a piece of pumice that fits comfortably in his hand, roughly the size of a hen's egg, worn smooth on one side from years of use. He rubs this stone across the surface of the dried vellum in circular motions, applying gentle, consistent pressure. Rub, rub, rub. The sound is soft, a whisper of stone on skin, rhythmic and meditative. The pumice catches on the small irregularities in the vellum, wearing them down, smoothing them away. A fine white dust begins to accumulate, the microscopic particles of skin being abraded away, floating in the air, settling on the parchmenter's hands and sleeves. He works systematically, covering every inch of the surface, overlapping his circles to ensure uniformity. Rub, rub, rub. The vellum changes under his hands. Where it was slightly rough, it becomes smooth. Where it was dull, it takes on a subtle sheen. The pumice burnishes the surface, compressing the fibers, creating a texture that is perfect for holding ink. If you were to run your fingers across it now, it would feel like velvet, soft and dense, with just the slightest resistance when you push against the grain. The parchmenter turns the vellum over and repeats the process on the other side. Both sides must be prepared, because both sides will be written on. Vellum is too precious to waste. Every sheet will hold text on both the hair side and the flesh side, each page contributing to the book that will eventually be bound from these individual leaves. After the pumicing is complete, the vellum is inspected. The parchmenter holds it up to the light, looking for flaws. Thin spots where the knife cut too deep, thick spots where the scraping was insufficient, holes where the original hide had been damaged, perhaps by a thorn or a bite from another animal. These flaws are noted, marked with a tiny point of charcoal, because later, when the scribe is laying out the pages, he will need to avoid placing important text in these areas. A hole can be worked around, incorporated into the design, but it must be known, it must be planned for. Finally, the vellum is cut. The stretched sheet is too large to use as a single page, so it is divided. The parchmenter uses a straight edge and a sharp knife, measuring carefully, cutting the vellum into rectangles of standard size. The size depends on the type of book being made. A Bible requires large pages, impressive and grand. A book of hours for personal devotion might be small, portable, intimate. Each cut must be precise, because the margins must be even. The text blocks must align when the pages are eventually stacked and sewn together. The cut sheets are stacked carefully, interleaved with thin wooden boards to keep them flat, to prevent them from curling as the monastery's humidity changes with the seasons. They are stored in a dry cupboard, protected from mice and insects, waiting for the moment when they will be taken to the Scriptorium, when they will be transformed from blank potential into carriers of meaning. You select a sheet from this stack. It is cool to the touch, smooth, with a slight give when you press it gently. It is cream-colored, not quite white, with the faintest variations in tone across its surface, subtle enough that you would not notice unless you looked closely. These variations tell the story of the animal, the parts of the skin that were thicker or thinner, the areas that saw more sun or less. The vellum is not uniform, not industrial, not perfect. It is organic, variable, alive in its own way. You carry this sheet to your desk in the scriptorium. You lay it on the angled surface, positioning it so that the grain runs horizontally, so that your quill will move with the fibers rather than against them. The vellum rests there, waiting, luminous in the gentle light from the window. It is ready, but you are not yet. Before you can write, you must create the structure that will hold the text. You must create the invisible geometry of the page, the lines and margins that will guide your hand, that will ensure consistency, that will make this page match all the other pages in the book. This is the work of pricking and ruling. The pricking comes first. You need a tool for this, a compass, but not the kind used for drawing circles. This is a pricking compass, simpler, with two sharp points that can be adjusted to a specific distance apart. You set this distance according to the pattern you are following, the design of the page that has been decided before you ever sat down to work. For a standard Bible, the text block will be a certain height, divided into a certain number of lines. The spacing between these lines has been calculated, measured, approved by the master of the scriptorium. You position the compass at the top edge of the vellum, just inside the margin that will eventually be trimmed away. You press down gently, and the sharp point pierces the skin, creating a tiny hole, barely visible, just large enough to see when you hold the page up to the light. You move the compass down, using the second point to find the position of the first hole, ensuring that the spacing is exact. You press again. Another hole, and again, and again. Prick, prick, prick. Down the left edge of the page, you create a vertical line of holes, each one marking where a horizontal line of text will eventually sit. The rhythm is meditative, precise, requiring focus, but not strain. You must press hard enough to pierce the vellum cleanly, but not so hard that you tear it, not so hard that the hole becomes ragged. Each prick must be identical to the last. When you reach the bottom of the page, you move to the right edge and repeat the process, creating a mirror image of the holes you just made on the left. These holes must align perfectly with their partners across the page, because the lines that will connect them must be horizontal, must be parallel, must create the visual harmony that makes a page beautiful to read. The pricking is complete. Now you need to connect these holes with lines to create the actual guides that your text will follow. For this, you use a straight edge and a stylus, or sometimes a very fine piece of graphite, though graphite is rare and expensive, mined in only a few places, jealously hoarded. The straight edge is a length of polished wood, perfectly straight, thin enough to lay flat against the vellum without creating a shadow that would obscure your work. You position it between two corresponding holes, one on the left edge, one on the right, aligning it carefully. You hold it steady with your left hand, pressing just firmly enough to keep it from sliding, but not so hard that you dent the vellum. With your right hand, you take the stylus, a pointed tool made from bone or metal, and you draw it along the edge of the straight edge, scribing a line into the surface of the vellum. The stylus does not leave a mark like ink would. Instead, it creates a shallow groove, a depression in the surface that catches the light at a certain angle that your eye can follow even though it is essentially invisible when looked at directly. You draw the stylus from left to right, maintaining even pressure, creating a line that is straight, fine, perfect. The line connects the two prick marks, running across the full width of the text block. You lift the straight edge, move it down to the next pair of holes and repeat. Line after line after line. The work is slow, careful, almost ritualistic. Your mind empties as your hands move through the familiar motions. Position the straight edge, check the alignment, draw the line, lift, move down, repeat. There is no room for error here. If a line is crooked, the text that follows it will be crooked too, and the page will look wrong, unbalanced, unworthy of the words it carries. Some scribes prefer to use a plummet for this work, a piece of lead that leaves a faint grey mark on the vellum. The advantage of plummet is that the lines are more visible, easier to follow when you are writing. The disadvantage is that the marks must be erased later, after the text is complete, requiring more work, more rubbing with pumice or bread crumbs, more opportunity to damage the page. The stylus lines are invisible from most angles, disappearing once the ink is applied, becoming ghost guides that serve their purpose and then fade into the background. When all the horizontal lines are drawn, you must add the vertical lines that define the margins and columns. The left margin where the text begins, the right margin where it ends. If the page is designed for 2 columns, as many large Bibles are, you must add a vertical line down the center, dividing the text block into 2 equal halves, each with its own set of margins. You use the same technique, the same straight edge and stylus, but now you must be even more careful because these vertical lines run the full height of the page, and any deviation from perfect straightness will be glaringly obvious. You work from top to bottom, keeping your hands steady, breathing slowly, letting the tool do the work. The geometry of the page emerges gradually. What was blank vellum becomes a structured field, a grid of invisible lines that will contain and organize the text. The proportions are beautiful, mathematical, based on ratios that the Greeks understood, that the Romans perfected, that we have inherited and preserved. The text block is not centered on the page. The margins are wider at the bottom and outer edge than at the top and inner edge, creating a visual balance that accounts for how the eye perceives the page, how the hand holds the book, how the pages will eventually sit when bound together. You sit back and look at your work. The vellum is no longer blank, even though it appears blank to the casual eye. It is prepared, structured, ready to receive text. The invisible lines wait, patient, eternal. They will guide your hand through hundreds, thousands of letters, through the words of psalms and gospels and prayers, through the accumulated wisdom of the fathers, through the revelation of the divine. But before you can write these words, before you can form a single letter, you need ink. And making ink is its own form of alchemy, its own meditation, its own small miracle. The ink used in the scriptorium is called iron gall ink, and it has been the standard for centuries, the best we know how to make, the most permanent, the most resistant to fading and decay. The recipe is simple in theory, but requires patience and precision in practice. It begins in the forest. In autumn, when the leaves are beginning to turn, you walk among the oak trees looking for galls. Oak galls are strange growths, round and hard, that appear on the branches and leaves of oak trees. They are not part of the tree itself. They are created by wasps, tiny insects that lay their eggs in the bark, injecting a chemical that causes the tree to grow a protective shell around the egg. This shell is the gall, and it is filled with tannic acid, the crucial ingredient for making ink. The best galls are hard, dense, heavy for their size. You collect them in a basket, choosing carefully, rejecting any that are soft or have already been broken open by emerging wasps. The galls rattle in the basket as you walk, a dry, woody sound, the sound of potential. You gather as many as you can carry, because the monastery will need ink throughout the winter, throughout the year, and it is better to have too much than too little. Back at the monastery, the galls are crushed. This can be done with a mortar and pestle, the traditional method, grinding the hard shells into a coarse powder. The work is physical, repetitive, the pestle rising and falling, the galls cracking and splintering, and finally breaking down into fragments. Some monasteries have a mill for this purpose, a stone wheel that rolls over the galls, crushing them efficiently, but here, in this small monastery, it is done by hand. The crushed galls are a dull brown color, unremarkable, giving no hint of the transformation they will undergo. They are placed in a jar, covered with water or sometimes wine, and left to soak. The liquid extracts the tannic acid from the galls, drawing it out slowly, infusing the water with a pale, tea-colored tint. This mixture sits for days, sometimes weeks, sealed against evaporation, developing. While the galls are soaking, you prepare the other components. You need iron salts, specifically ferrous sulfate, which is obtained by leaving pieces of iron in a solution of sulfuric acid, or more commonly in a monastery setting, by collecting the green crystals that form on rusty iron left in vinegar. The iron slowly dissolves, reacting with the acid, forming a compound that will interact with the tannic acid in a very specific way. The ferrous sulfate is dissolved in a small amount of water, creating a pale, almost colorless solution. This solution looks innocent, harmless, like slightly cloudy water. It gives no indication of what it is about to do. When the gall infusion is ready, when the tannic acid has been fully extracted and the liquid has taken on a deep amber color, you combine it with the iron solution. This is the moment of transformation, the chemical marriage that creates ink. You pour the iron solution into the gall infusion slowly, watching carefully. At first, nothing seems to happen. The pale iron water disappears into the darker gall liquid, mixing, swirling. But then, within seconds, the color begins to change. The amber darkens to brown, the brown deepens to purple, the purple shifts to a blue-black, and finally to the deep, rich black of true ink. The transformation is instant, dramatic, almost magical. The liquid turns from pale gray to absolute black in a matter of heartbeats, as if darkness itself is being born in the jar. The chemical reaction is a complexation, the tannic acid molecules binding with the iron ions, forming a new compound that is intensely colored, insoluble in water, permanent. This compound, iron tannate, is what gives the ink its color and its durability. Unlike inks made from soot or carbon, which sit on the surface of the vellum and can be scraped away, iron gall ink penetrates the fibers, becomes part of the page itself. Over time, the iron will oxidize further, and the ink will turn brown, but the text will remain readable, permanent, for centuries, for millennia. The freshly made ink has a smell, sharp and acidic, like vinegar mixed with metal, with an undertone of wine if wine was used in the gall infusion. It is not an unpleasant smell exactly, but it is distinctive, unmistakable. When you work with this ink all day, the smell seeps into your clothes, your skin, your hair. You carry it with you, a signature scent that marks you as a scribe, as someone who works with words, who transforms ideas into visible form. The ink is not quite ready to use yet. It must be filtered to remove any particles of undissolved gall, any sediment that might clog the quill or create blotches on the page. You pour it through a fine cloth, linen woven so tightly that only the liquid can pass through, leaving behind any solid material. The filtered ink is stored in a horn, a small container made from a cow's horn, sealed with a cork or wooden plug. The horn is translucent, allowing you to see how much ink remains, and it sits snugly in a hole drilled into the corner of your desk, always within reach, waiting. Some scribes add gum arabic to their ink, a resin from acacia trees, dissolved in water, which makes the ink slightly thicker, more viscous, less likely to spread on the vellum. The gum also gives the ink a slight sheen when dry, making the letters catch the light in a particular way. Other scribes prefer their ink thinner, more fluid, allowing for faster writing, even if it means greater risk of feathering or bleeding into the fibers of the vellum. Each scribe has preferences, adjustments to the basic recipe, small modifications that make the ink their own. The ink in your horn is perfect, not too thick, not too thin, black as a moonless night, ready to carry words across time. But you still cannot write, not yet. You need the instrument, the tool that will transfer the ink from horn to page, that will shape the letters, that will make your thoughts visible. You need a quill. The best quills come from geese, specifically from the flight feathers of the wings. These feathers are large, strong, with a hollow shaft that can hold a reservoir of ink. They are also naturally curved, which matters more than you might think. A feather from the left wing of a goose curves slightly to the right when held in the right hand, allowing the tip to meet the page at the optimal angle. A feather from the right wing curves the opposite way and is therefore better suited for left-handed scribes, though left-handed scribes are rare, often trained out of their natural preference, because the world of writing is built for right-handed workers. The feathers arrive at the monastery still attached to the goose, or sometimes already plucked, bundled, and sold by farmers who raise geese for meat and down. The primary flight feathers, the longest and strongest, are selected. Each goose provides perhaps 10 or 12 usable quills, 5 or 6 from each wing. The rest of the feathers are too small, too weak, suitable perhaps for fletching arrows, but not for writing. Before a feather can be used as a quill, it must be prepared. The first step is to remove the barbs, the soft, fluffy part of the feather that makes it useful for flight, but useless for writing. You hold the feather shaft in one hand and pull the barbs away with the other, stripping them down to the base, leaving only the hollow shaft, called the calamus. This work is quick, satisfying, the barbs coming away in soft handfuls, floating on the air, drifting across the floor of the scriptorium like tiny white feathers in a snow globe. The stripped shaft is pale, almost translucent, with a slightly oily sheen. It is flexible, too flexible to use immediately. A fresh quill will bend and buckle under the pressure of writing, will not hold its shape, will not create clean lines. The shaft must be hardened. Hardening a quill is done with heat, specifically by burying the shaft in hot sand. You prepare a small pot filled with fine sand, heated over a fire until it is almost too hot to touch. The quill shaft is pushed into this sand, buried completely, left to bake. The heat drives the moisture out of the hollow shaft, causes the proteins in the keratin to cross-link, makes the shaft rigid, hard, permanent. After a few minutes, the quill is removed from the sand, now transparent, glassy, completely transformed in structure. When you tap it against the desk, it sounds different, higher, sharper, like tapping on glass rather than on bone. The hardened quill is ready to be cut, and the cutting is an art in itself, perhaps the most crucial skill a scribe must master. The cut determines everything: the width of the line, the flexibility of the tip, the way the ink flows, the character of the script. A poorly cut quill will make writing impossible. A perfectly cut quill will make writing feel effortless, as if the letters are forming themselves, as if you are merely guiding a process that wants to happen. You need a knife for this work, a small, sharp blade, kept razor-sharp through constant stropping on a leather belt. The knife is an extension of your hand, familiar, trusted, as important to your work as the quill itself. You use this same knife for everything: cutting vellum, scraping away mistakes, sharpening quills, preparing pigments. The first cut is made about 2 fingers width from the tip of the quill shaft. You place the shaft on a small cutting board, hold it steady with your left hand, and slice through it at an angle, creating a diagonal cut that exposes the hollow interior. The angle of this cut is important. Too steep, and the nib will be weak. Too shallow, and the ink will not flow properly. With the angled cut complete, you make a second cut on the underside of the quill, creating a scoop, a concave surface that will hold the ink when you dip the quill into the horn. This cut requires a delicate touch, removing just enough material to create the reservoir without weakening the structure. The hollow shaft of the quill already provides some capacity for holding ink, but this scoop increases it, allows you to write for longer before needing to redip. Now comes the most delicate part: splitting the tip. You place the point of your knife exactly in the center of the exposed end of the quill shaft and apply gentle, even pressure. The knife penetrates the shaft, creating a thin crack that runs up the center of the nib. This slit is essential. It acts as a capillary channel, drawing ink from the reservoir down to the tip through surface tension, providing a controlled flow of ink to the writing edge. Slice. The split must be perfectly centered, perfectly straight, running exactly along the axis of the shaft. If it deviates even slightly to one side, the quill will write unevenly, one tine thicker than the other, creating letters that are unbalanced, ugly. You can feel the split as you make it, the knife moving through the keratin with a particular resistance, a particular sound. When it is right, when the split is true, you know. Finally, you make the last cut, the one that creates the actual writing edge. You place the quill on the cutting board, tip hanging over the edge, and with a single, decisive motion, you slice straight across the end, perpendicular to the split. This cut creates two tines, two pointed tips that will touch the vellum, that will release the ink in a controlled line. The writing edge must be crisp, clean, sharp. You examine it closely, holding it up to the light, looking for any irregularities, any roughness that might catch on the vellum or cause the ink to flow unevenly. If necessary, you make tiny adjustments, shaving a microscopic amount from one tine or the other, ensuring perfect symmetry. The completed quill is a beautiful object, simple and functional. The hollow shaft, transparent and hard. The split running up the center of the nib. The two tines, sharp and even. It weighs almost nothing, barely more than air, but it is strong, capable of writing thousands of letters before the tip wears down and must be recut. You test the quill by dipping it in the ink horn, just the tip, just enough to fill the reservoir. The ink flows into the split, drawn upward by capillary action, filling the channel, waiting. You touch the quill to a scrap of vellum, and the ink begins to flow, a dark line appearing where the tines meet the page. You make a few test strokes, feeling the way the quill responds, the way it flexes slightly under pressure, the way the line thickens when you press harder and thins when you ease off. The quill is perfect, the ink is perfect, the vellum is perfect, pricked and ruled, ready to receive text. Everything is prepared. The monastery bells ring for none, the afternoon prayer, but you are excused from attending. The work of copying scripture is itself a form of prayer, perhaps the highest form, because it makes the word of God permanent, accessible, multiplied. While the other brothers chant in the chapel, you sit at your desk in the scriptorium, in the warm, quiet room that smells of skin and iron and wine. You position the vellum carefully, aligning it so the lines you scribed earlier run perfectly horizontal in your field of vision. You dip the quill, not too deep, just enough to wet the tines. You bring the quill to the first line, to the left margin, and you pause. This is the moment. Everything before was preparation, but now you begin the actual work. Now you make marks that will last forever. The first letter forms slowly, carefully. You are copying a psalm, one you know by heart, but you still follow the exemplar, the master copy that sits on a stand beside your desk. Every letter must be identical to the original. Every word must be placed exactly as the designer intended. There is no room for creativity here, no room for personal expression. You are not creating. You are transmitting, preserving, extending the life of a text that has already been perfected by earlier scribes, earlier scholars, ultimately by the divine inspiration that created these words in the first place. The quill scratches across the vellum, and the sound is like silk tearing, like a whisper, like breathing. The scratch is constant, rhythmic, the heartbeat of the scriptorium. Around you, the other scribes work at their desks, each one creating the same sound, each one adding their voice to the chorus. Together, you are an orchestra of scratches, a symphony of letters being born. Your hand moves in practice patterns, forming the shapes of Carolingian minuscule, the script style that has become standard across Western Christianity. The letters are rounded, clear, legible, a vast improvement over the cramped, angular scripts of earlier centuries. Each letter has its own personality, its own set of strokes. The I with its round belly and upright stem. The D with its tall ascender reaching toward heaven. The G with its descender dropping below the baseline, anchoring the word to the earth. You work from left to right, following the invisible lines, filling them with black letters. When you reach the right margin, you do not break the word. You plan ahead, adjusting the spacing of the letters in the line to ensure that each word is complete, that no syllable is orphaned on the next line. This requires constant calculation, constant awareness of how much space remains, how many letters are yet to come. The ink flows steadily from the quill, neither too fast nor too slow. When the reservoir begins to empty, you can feel it, a slight resistance, a scratching that becomes more pronounced. You dip again, and the flow resumes, smooth and controlled. Each dip provides enough ink for perhaps half a line of text, sometimes more, sometimes less, depending on the size of the letters, the wetness of the nib. Hours pass. The light from the window shifts, moving across the desk as the sun tracks across the sky. In winter, the light is brief, precious, gone by mid-afternoon. You work quickly during these lit hours, making the most of the natural light, which is clearer and kinder to the eyes than candlelight. When the sun sets, you will light candles if the work is urgent, but you prefer to stop, to rest your eyes, to spend the evening in prayer or meditation, or simply sitting in the darkness, conserving the energy you will need for tomorrow's work. But today the light holds, and you write, line after line, word after word. The psalm unfolds on the vellum, the familiar words appearing in perfect black letters, each one a small victory, each one a step closer to completing the page, completing the choir, completing the book. Your back begins to ache from bending over the desk. Your neck stiffens. Your right hand cramps slightly, the muscles protesting the repetitive motion. But these discomforts are familiar, expected, part of the work. You adjust your posture, roll your shoulders, flex your fingers, and continue. The work is meditation. The work is prayer. The work is service. By Vespers, you have completed one full page, both sides written, the text flowing seamlessly from one side to the other. The vellum is no longer blank. It is alive with words, dense with meaning, beautiful in its precision. You set it aside to dry, careful not to touch the ink, not to smudge the hours of work. The iron Gall ink dries quickly, the water evaporating, leaving behind the insoluble iron tannate bonded to the vellum fibers, but it is still wise to be cautious. Tomorrow you will begin another page, and another after that, and another. The work is endless because there are always more books needed, more copies required, more texts to be preserved. A book wears out eventually, even a book made from vellum and bound in leather. The pages thin from turning. The ink fades from exposure to light. The binding loosens. And so new copies must be made, the cycle continuing, the knowledge passing from one generation to the next through the work of scribes like you, anonymous, patient, devoted. You clean your quill, dipping it in vinegar to dissolve any dried ink, wiping it carefully with a soft cloth. You seal the ink horn, preventing evaporation. You return the vellum to its stack, protected between boards. The scriptorium grows cold as the brazier burns low, the coals settling into grey ash with only a few orange embers remaining. You wrap your robe tighter, feeling the chill creep in from the stone walls, and you leave the room, walking down the corridor toward the chapel for evening prayers. Outside, the world is dark. The sun has set, and there is no moon tonight, only stars scattered across the black sky like spilled salt. The monastery sits on a hill, isolated, surrounded by fields and forest, miles from the nearest village. In the darkness, it is easy to imagine that you are the only light, the only warmth, the only outpost of civilization in an ocean of wilderness. But inside the chapel, candles burn, small flames multiplied in the dozens, reflecting off the white walls, creating a golden glow. The brothers gather, their voices rising in the ancient words of the Psalms, the same words you spent the day copying, now spoken aloud, now sung, now returned to the air from which they came. Your voice joins with theirs, part of the community, part of the rhythm of prayer that structures the day, that gives meaning to the hours, that connects this moment to all the moments that came before and all that will come after. After prayers, there is a simple meal in the refectory. Bread and cheese and ale, eaten in silence or near silence, the brothers tired from their day's work, eager for rest. You eat slowly, savoring the warm bread, the sharp cheese, the bitter ale. Food tastes better after a day of focused work, after hours of holding still, of controlling your hand, of pouring your attention into the smallest details. Then to the dormitory, a long room with narrow beds arranged along both walls. The beds are hard, just straw mattresses on wooden frames, but you are so tired that you barely notice. You lie down, pull the wool blanket over yourself, and close your eyes. The sounds of the monastery at night surround you. The wind against the walls, the creaking of timbers, the breathing of the other brothers, the distant hoot of an owl hunting in the forest. Sleep comes quickly, and with it dreams. You dream of letters, thousands of them flowing from your quill in an endless stream, filling page after page after page, creating books that pile up around you, towers of books, mountains of books, more books than could ever be read in a lifetime, in 100 lifetimes. The dream is not stressful. It is peaceful, satisfying, because each book is perfect, each letter exactly right, each word placed precisely where it belongs. And when you wake before dawn, roused by the bell for lauds, you know that today you will return to the scriptorium, to the warm room, to the vellum and ink and quill. You will pick up where you left off, continuing the psalm, moving toward the next page, the next quire, the next complete volume. The work is never finished, but that is not a burden. That is a blessing. That is purpose. That is how you serve God, how you serve the future, how you ensure that knowledge survives the darkness, that wisdom outlasts the chaos, that the light of the Word continues to shine. In the scriptorium, time is different. Hours collapse into moments or expand into eternities. A single letter can take minutes to form perfectly, or a whole line can flow in seconds. You learn to trust the process, to let your hand move with its own intelligence, guided by years of practice, by thousands of hours spent making the same shapes over and over until they become automatic, until you do not think about how to form an R or an E. You simply form it, the way you breathe without thinking about breathing. The vellum you work on today is particularly fine, thin enough to be translucent when held to the light, smooth enough that the quill glides across it with almost no resistance. This is the kind of vellum reserved for important books, for Bibles or gospel books, for volumes that will be displayed on altars or carried in processions. You handle it with extra care, aware of its value, aware that a single mistake would be catastrophic. The text you are copying is from the Gospel of John, the opening verses, the poetry of creation and light. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You have copied these lines before many times, but they never lose their power. Each time you feel the weight of them, the profound mystery they point toward. You are not just copying words. You are copying the word itself, making it manifest in physical form, giving it substance and permanence. Your quill moves steadily, the black letters appearing one by one. The ink is fresh today, made just yesterday, and it has a slight warmth to it, a liveliness that older ink sometimes loses. The black is pure, deep, absolute. Against the cream vellum, the contrast is stark, beautiful, almost painful in its intensity. Around you, the other scribes work in their own rhythms. Brother Martin, the eldest, who has been copying texts for 40 years, works slowly but with perfect accuracy. He never makes mistakes, never has to scrape away an error. His hand is so steady that his letters look printed, mechanical, identical. Brother Thomas, young and ambitious, works quickly, racing through his pages, sometimes too quickly, leaving smudges, occasionally misjudging the spacing and having to squeeze letters together at the end of a line. And Brother William, silent and intense, who copies only mathematical and astronomical texts, fills his pages with numbers and diagrams, circles and angles, the sacred geometry that underlies creation. Each of you contributes to the library, the great collection of books that the monastery is building, volume by volume, year by year. The library is not large yet, perhaps 300 books, but it is growing. Some of these books are unique, the only copies in existence. If the monastery were to burn, if the library were destroyed, these texts would be lost forever, erased from human knowledge. This is why the work matters. This is why you return to the desk every day, despite the ache in your back, despite the strain in your eyes, despite the cramping in your hand. The morning passes, the light strengthens, then begins to fade again as the sun moves past its zenith. You finish the page you were working on and begin another. The rhythm continues, unbroken, meditative, eternal. At some point, you become aware that your quill needs recutting. The tip has worn down from hours of use, become blunt, creating lines that are slightly fuzzy, less crisp than they should be. You set down the quill and reach for your knife. The recutting is quick, practiced, automatic. A few careful slices, a new edge created, the tines sharpened and balanced. You test the quill on a scrap, satisfied with the result, and return to the text. The work continues, page after page, until the light fails completely and you can no longer see clearly enough to write without risk of error. You set down your quill for the day, clean it, store it, cover your work. The transition from working to not working is always slightly jarring, a return to awareness of your body, of time, of the world beyond the page. But tomorrow you will return, and the day after, and the day after that. The work is patient. The work is eternal. The work is light made visible, words preserved against the darkness, knowledge carried forward through time by the movement of your hand, the scratch of your quill, the alchemy of oak galls and iron, of vellum and discipline and devotion. This is the life of the medieval illuminator, the scribe, the keeper of words. This is the slow, sacred work of making books in a world that desperately needs them, in a world that has not yet learned to mass-produce knowledge, in a world where each book is a treasure, a miracle, a light burning against the night. And you are the one who tends that light, feeds it, keeps it alive, one letter at a time, one word at a time, one page at a time, until the work is done, until the book is complete, until the knowledge passes into other hands, other eyes, other minds, and continues its journey through the centuries, carrying the accumulated wisdom of humanity forward into the future, into the unknown, into the light. The text is complete now, the black letters standing in perfect rows across the vellum, each line measured, each word placed exactly where it belongs. But the page is not finished. The words alone are not enough. A gospel book, a psalter, a book of hours. These are not mere carriers of information. They are objects of devotion, windows into the divine, physical manifestations of the sacred. They must be beautiful. They must glow. They must transform the ordinary act of reading into an encounter with glory. This is where the illumination begins. You have been trained in this art for years, apprenticed to the master illuminator, learning the secrets of pigment and gold, the delicate dance between control and surrender that creates beauty. The work of the scribe is precise, mechanical, a matter of discipline and repetition. But the work of the illuminator is different. It requires the same discipline, yes, but it also requires something else, something harder to name. Vision, sensitivity. The ability to see what is not yet there and bring it into being. The blackletter script you have written is itself a form of art, though most people do not think of it that way. Each letter is constructed from vertical strokes, thick and dark, with thin horizontal connectors. The style is called textura, named for the woven appearance it creates on the page, the letters standing side by side like threads in fabric, creating a dense, almost impenetrable wall of text. This is the script of formality, of importance, of permanence. It is harder to read than the rounded Carolingian minuscule, but it is more impressive, more commanding. It announces that what is written here matters. Creating blackletter requires a different rhythm than other scripts. The quill must move in straight, vertical strokes, down and lift, each stroke parallel to the last, each one exactly the same width. There is no flowing here, no cursive connection between letters. Each letter is discrete, separate, built from individual strokes assembled into a whole. Down, lift, down, lift. The rhythm is like breathing, like a heartbeat, steady and unchanging. Your hand moves with mechanical precision, placing each stroke exactly where it belongs. The thick verticals are made by pressing the quill firmly against the vellum, allowing both tines to touch, creating a wide line. The thin horizontals are made by turning the quill slightly and using just one tine, creating a hairline that barely interrupts the texture. Down, lift, down, lift. The ink flows into the fibers of the vellum, spreading microscopically, being absorbed and held. The iron tannate bonds with the collagen in the skin, becoming part of the material itself. As the water evaporates, the letters darken, the black deepening, becoming richer, more absolute. Fresh ink has a slight shine to it, a wetness that catches the light. Dry ink is matte, absorbing light rather than reflecting it, creating letters that seem to recede slightly into the page. You work methodically, filling the ruled lines with text. The words are Latin, the language of the church, the language of learning, the language that connects this remote monastery to every other monastery, every cathedral, every university across Christendom. The words are familiar, worn smooth by repetition, but they retain their power. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. In the beginning was the Word. The black letter fills the page, dense and beautiful, creating the foundation upon which the illumination will rest. But before you can begin the illumination proper, the page must dry completely. Any moisture remaining in the ink could mix with the pigments, could cause bleeding or smearing, could ruin hours of work. So you set the written page aside, on a clean board, in a part of the scriptorium where the air circulates freely. Tomorrow, or the day after, when the ink is fully dry, fully bonded to the vellum, you will return to it and begin the transformation. While the page dries, you prepare your materials. The illumination will require gold, the metal of heaven, of kingship, of eternity. It will require pigments, colors more intense and pure than anything found in nature, created through processes that are part chemistry, part alchemy, part prayer. Each color has its own recipe, its own preparation, its own personality. The gold comes first. It always comes first. Gold is applied before the other colors because the burnishing process, the rubbing that makes the gold shine, might damage any pigment applied earlier. So the sequence is established. Gold, then blue, then red, then green, then all the other colors in descending order of value and difficulty. But gold does not adhere to vellum on its own. The surface is too smooth, too resistant. You need a ground, a substrate that will hold the gold, that will allow it to be burnished to a high shine. This ground is called gesso, and making it is an art in itself. The gesso begins with a base of slaked plaster, calcium sulfate, that has been mixed with water and allowed to cure. This plaster is ground to an impossibly fine powder, finer than flour, finer than dust, so fine that it feels like silk when rubbed between your fingers. The grinding is done in a mortar, the pestle moving in slow circles, crushing any particles that might create texture, any grains that might prevent the gesso from being perfectly smooth. To this powder you add a binder, something that will make it sticky, adhesive, capable of holding to the vellum and to the gold. The traditional binder is white lead, a toxic substance that must be handled carefully, but some illuminators prefer fish glue, made by boiling the swim bladders of sturgeon, creating a sticky, translucent gel. Others use gum arabic or egg white, each with its own properties, its own advantages and disadvantages. You use fish glue, the traditional choice, mixing it with the ground plaster until the consistency is right. Not too thick, not too thin, spreadable but not runny. To this mixture, you add a small amount of red earth, Armenian bole or red ochre, which gives the gesso a subtle pink color. This color serves a purpose. It allows you to see where the gesso has been applied to ensure even coverage, and later, when the gold is laid down, Any tiny gaps in the gold leaf will show pink rather than white, making the gold appear even richer, even warmer. The gesso is stored in a small ceramic pot, sealed against drying. When you need it, you scoop out a tiny amount with a brush, barely enough to cover the tip. Gesso is applied sparingly in areas where gold will be placed. The initial capital letter at the beginning of a chapter, the decorative borders around the text, the halos of saints in miniature paintings. These areas have been left blank during the writing process, spaces reserved for illumination, carefully planned and measured. You select a fine brush for this work, made from squirrel hair, soft and springy, capable of holding the gesso while applying it with precision. The brush is dipped into the gesso, just the tip, and then brought to the vellum. You work slowly, following the outline of the design you have sketched lightly in graphite. For this page, the design is an initial letter, a large, ornate B beginning the word beatus, blessed. The letter will be 3 inches tall, filled with intricate decorative elements, vines and flowers and geometric patterns, all covered in gold. The gesso goes down in thin layers, each one barely visible. You cannot apply it all at once. Too much gesso will crack when it dries, will create an uneven surface that cannot be properly burnished. Instead, you build it up gradually, layer upon layer, allowing each layer to dry before applying the next. The first layer is transparent, barely there, just enough to give the vellum a slight texture. The second layer adds more substance, more body. By the third or fourth layer, the gesso begins to show its pink color, begins to rise slightly above the surface of the vellum, creating a low relief, a gentle dome that will eventually hold the gold. Each layer must dry completely before the next is applied. In the cold, dry air of the scriptorium, this takes perhaps 15 minutes, sometimes less. You work on other preparations while waiting, grinding pigments, cleaning brushes, sketching designs on other pages. The rhythm of the work is patient, accommodating these necessary pauses, these moments of waiting that are themselves a form of meditation. After 4 layers, the gesso is ready. It has a subtle sheen, smooth and slightly tacky to the touch when breathed upon. This tackiness is crucial. When you are ready to apply the gold, you will breathe on the gesso, your warm, moist breath reactivating the adhesive properties of the fish glue, making the surface sticky enough to grab the gold leaf and hold it. But the gesso must cure overnight. It must harden completely, must form a stable base that will not crack or crumble when burnished. So once again, you set the page aside, the pink gesso glowing softly in the candlelight, waiting for tomorrow, for the next stage of transformation. The gold arrives at the monastery in books, literally. Gold leaf is so thin, so delicate, that it must be interleaved between pages of tissue paper or vellum to protect it. Each leaf is a square perhaps 3 inches on a side, hammered to a thickness of perhaps 1/10,000th of an inch, thin enough to be translucent when held to the light, thin enough that a breath can send it flying across the room. The making of gold leaf is a specialized craft, done by gold beaters in large cities, men who spend their days hammering gold between sheets of animal intestine, the constant pounding spreading the metal, thinning it, until a single ounce of gold can cover more than 100 square feet. The gold used in illumination is not pure. Pure gold is too soft, too prone to tearing during the beating process. Instead, it is alloyed with small amounts of silver or copper, just enough to give it structure, to make it handleable. The book of gold leaf sits in a locked cabinet, too valuable to leave out, too precious to risk. Each leaf represents a significant expense, a portion of the monastery's limited funds. Gold is more valuable than almost anything else, more valuable than land in some cases, certainly more valuable than the labor that will transform it into illumination. But the expense is justified. A book covered in gold glorifies God, attracts pilgrims, brings prestige to the monastery. It is an investment in the eternal, a statement that some things are worth more than money. When the gesso has cured, When the page is ready, you prepare to apply the gold. This work must be done in a space without drafts, without air movement of any kind. A single breeze can lift the gold leaf and send it floating away, wasted. The scriptorium is ideal for this work, the thick walls and small windows ensuring stillness, the winter air heavy and motionless. You open the book of gold leaf carefully, revealing the first sheet, resting between protective leaves. The gold catches the light immediately, gleaming, almost liquid in its brightness. You need a tool to lift the gold, to transfer it from the book to the vellum. This tool is called a gilder's tip, a wide, flat brush made from the softest hair available, usually squirrel, designed to generate static electricity that will attract and hold the delicate gold. You prepare the gilder's tip by brushing it across your hair, across your forearm, generating a charge. The hairs of the brush stand slightly apart, eager, ready to receive the gold. You bring the brush close to the gold leaf, not touching, just hovering above it. The static attraction is enough. The gold lifts from the page, clinging to the brush, floating, weightless, shimmering. Carefully, moving with deliberate slowness, you transfer the gold-laden brush to the vellum, to the area where the gesso waits. But before the gold touches the gesso, you must activate the adhesive. You lean close to the page and breathe on the gesso, a long, warm, moist breath. The moisture in your breath reactivates the fish glue, makes the surface tacky ready. You can see the change, a slight darkening of the pink surface, a subtle increase in sheen. Now, quickly, before the moisture evaporates, you lower the gold leaf onto the gesso. The gold settles, drawn by the tackiness, conforming to the shape of the raised letter. It clings immediately, the adhesive capturing it, holding it in place. The excess gold, the parts that extend beyond the gessoed area, remain free, floating slightly, ready to be brushed away later. You repeat this process for each section of the design that will receive gold. Breathe, lay, breathe, lay. The work is delicate, requiring total focus, absolute control. Any tremor in your hand, any irregularity in your breath, any deviation from the practiced movement can result in misalignment, in gold placed crookedly, in imperfection. When all the gold is laid, you leave it to dry, to bond fully with the gesso. An hour passes, maybe two. You work on other tasks, preparing pigments, sketching designs, allowing the adhesive to cure. When you return to the page, the gold has settled completely, has become one with the gesso, no longer a separate layer but an integrated whole. Now comes the burnishing, the act that transforms dull gold into mirror-bright glory. For this work, you need a burnisher, a tool made from a hard, smooth stone, traditionally agate or hematite, or sometimes a tooth, usually from a wolf or large dog, polished to a glassy finish. The burnisher must be absolutely smooth, without any scratches or imperfections, because any flaw in the burnisher will transfer to the gold, creating marks that cannot be removed. Your burnisher is an agate, a beautiful stone, translucent brown with bands of darker amber running through it. It is mounted in a wooden handle, comfortable in your hand, the weight perfectly balanced. The stone has been in use for decades, passed down from the previous master illuminator, worn smooth by thousands of hours of burnishing, charged with the energy of all the books it has made beautiful. You begin to rub. The motion is circular, gentle at first, the stone gliding across the gold with barely any pressure. You are not trying to compress the gold yet, not trying to force it into the gesso. You are simply making contact, establishing the connection between stone and metal, warming both, preparing them for the work to come. Rub, rub, rub. The circles overlap, covering every part of the gold, ensuring that no area is neglected. As you rub, you can feel the texture of the gold changing under the stone. What began as slightly rough, slightly matte, begins to smooth. The gold is consolidating, the microscopic gaps between the particles closing, the surface becoming denser, more unified. You increase the pressure slightly, still moving in circles, still patient. The agate begins to compress the gold into the gesso, forcing it to conform exactly to the shape of the raised letter, eliminating any air pockets, any separation between gold and ground. This is crucial. If air remains trapped beneath the gold, the burnishing will create a hollow sound when you tap it, and the gold will eventually lift, will fall away, will be lost. Rub, rub, rub. The sound of the burnisher on gold is distinctive, a soft whisper, like silk on silk, rhythmic and soothing. The stone warms in your hand from friction, from the energy being transferred into the gold. Your hand moves automatically, following the contours of the design, attending to every curve and corner, every detail of the ornate letter. After perhaps 10 minutes of gentle burnishing, you begin to see the change. The gold is starting to shine. What was a dull yellow becomes brighter, more reflective. The surface is becoming smooth enough to catch the light, to hold it, to throw it back at your eyes. But this is just the beginning. True brilliance requires more work, more pressure, more time. You increase the pressure again, pressing harder, forcing the burnisher against the gold with significant force. Now you're not just smoothing the surface. You are compacting the metal, aligning the grain structure, creating a surface that is as close to perfect as human hands can achieve. The gold resists, but gradually it yields, becoming harder, denser, more brilliant. Rub, shine, rub, shine. The transformation is mesmerizing. With each pass of the burnisher, the gold becomes more mirror-like, more alive. It begins to reflect the room, the window, your face bent over the work. The light bounces off the gold with increasing intensity, creating a glow that seems to come from within, as if the gold itself is luminous, as if it contains its own light source. You work methodically, section by section, ensuring that every part of the design receives the same attention, the same pressure, the same care. The thicker areas of gesso, where the relief is higher, require more burnishing. The thinner edges need a lighter touch to avoid tearing through to the vellum below. You adjust constantly, reading the surface with your eyes and hands, responding to what the gold tells you. After 30 minutes of focused burnishing, the gold is complete. It shines like a mirror, like polished metal, like captured sunlight. When you hold the page at different angles, the gold seems to move, to shift, to come alive. This is the quality that makes gold so special, so valued in sacred art. It is not just a color. It is light made solid, heaven made visible, the eternal made tangible. You brush away the excess gold, the fragments that extend beyond the gessoed areas, using a soft brush to collect every flake. These fragments are not wasted. They are carefully gathered, saved in a small box, to be used later in powdered form, mixed into paint, or sent back to the gold beater to be resmelted and hammered into new leaves. Nothing is wasted. Gold is too precious. The illuminated letter now glows on the page, three-dimensional, radiating light, transforming the entire composition. The black text surrounding it seems darker by comparison, more intense, the contrast making both elements more powerful. But the gold alone is not enough. It needs color, needs the support of pigments that will harmonize with it, that will create a complete visual statement. The most important color, the one that will define the character of the illumination, is blue. Not just any blue, but ultramarine, the blue beyond the sea, the most expensive pigment in the world, worth more than gold by weight, made from Lapis Lazuli brought by caravan from the mountains of Afghanistan. A journey of thousands of miles, months of travel, through deserts and over mountain passes, from the edge of the known world to here, to this monastery, to your hand. The Lapis Lazuli arrives as rough stones, irregularly shaped, varying in quality. The finest stones are deep blue, almost purple, with flecks of gold-colored pyrites scattered through them like stars in a night sky. Lower quality stones are paler, more gray, contaminated with calcite or other minerals that dilute the intense blue. The monastery's stones are good, not the finest available, but good enough, pure enough to create a blue that will glorify the page. The process of transforming lapis lazuli into ultramarine pigment is complex, requiring multiple steps, each one crucial. The stones must first be cleaned, washed in water to remove any surface dirt or dust. Then they are heated gently in a small furnace, not hot enough to damage the blue azurite mineral that gives the stone its color, but hot enough to make the stone more brittle, easier to break apart. The heated stones are placed in a mortar, a large one, made from bronze or hard stone, and crushed with a pestle. The work is physical, repetitive, the pestle rising and falling, the stones cracking and splitting, and finally breaking down into smaller and smaller fragments. The goal is to reduce the lapis to a coarse powder, uniform in size, with all the pieces small enough that the blue mineral can be separated from the white calcite and other impurities. When the lapis is crushed, it is transferred to a grinding slab, a flat piece of porphyry or marble, perfectly smooth, and ground with a muller, a smaller stone that fits in the hand. The muller moves in circles, the same motion as burnishing, but with more force, grinding the coarse powder into a fine flour. The grinding must be thorough, patient, because any large particles remaining will create a gritty texture in the final paint, will prevent smooth application, will mar the perfection of the illumination. Grind, grind, grind. The sound is soft, granular like sand sliding across stone. The blue powder accumulates under the muller, spreading across the grinding slab, staining the white stone with streaks of deep color. Your hand moves in the familiar circles, applying constant pressure, feeling the texture change as the particles become smaller, finer, more uniform. After perhaps an hour of grinding, the powder is ready for the next step, the separation of pure blue from impurities. This is done through a process called levigation, a technique that uses water to wash away the lighter, paler particles while retaining the heavier, more intensely colored ones. The ground lapis is placed in a shallow bowl filled with water and stirred vigorously. The water becomes cloudy, milky with suspended particles. This mixture is poured into a second bowl, leaving behind the heaviest particles at the bottom of the first bowl. These heaviest particles are the purest blue, the ultramarine proper. The process is repeated multiple times, each wash separating the powder into different grades of quality. The first wash yields the finest ultramarine, deep and saturated, worth its weight in gold. The second wash is slightly paler, still beautiful but less intense. The third and fourth washes become progressively lighter, less valuable, though still useful for backgrounds or less important details. Nothing is wasted. Every gradation of blue has its purpose. The finest ultramarine is allowed to dry, spread on a clean cloth, protected from dust and contamination. When dry, it is a powder of extraordinary beauty, so intensely blue that it seems impossible, seems like something from another world. In bright light, it almost glows. In shadow, it appears black, absorbing light, revealing its depth. To use the ultramarine, it must be mixed with a binder, something that will allow it to adhere to the vellum, that will suspend the pigment particles and carry them from brush to page. The traditional binder is egg tempera, made from the yolk of an egg, separated from the white, mixed with water. The egg yolk is a perfect emulsion, containing both water and oil in stable suspension, capable of binding pigments without diminishing their color, drying to a matte, stable surface that is both durable and beautiful. You break an egg carefully, separating the yolk from the white, rolling the yolk between your palms to remove any clinging white, then puncturing the membrane and draining the yolk into a small dish. To this yolk, you add an equal amount of water, mixing gently to create a thin, milky liquid. This is your tempera base, fresh, ready to receive pigment. On a clean palette, a small piece of white tile or glass, you place a tiny mound of ultramarine powder, no more than would fit on the tip of your smallest finger. Ultramarine is too precious to waste, too expensive to use carelessly. You add a drop of egg tempera to the powder and begin to mix, using a small spatula or the handle of a brush, working the liquid into the dry pigment, creating a paste, then a cream, then a fluid paint. The blue deepens as it absorbs the binder, becoming richer, more intense, almost luminous. The consistency must be perfect, not too thick, not too thin. Too thick, and the paint will not flow properly from the brush, will leave visible brush strokes, will create an uneven surface. Too thin, and the color will be weak, transparent, requiring multiple coats to achieve the desired intensity. You test the paint by applying a small stroke to a scrap of vellum, watching how it flows, how it dries, adjusting with more pigment or more tempera until it is exactly right. The brush for applying ultramarine is different from the brush used for gesso. This is a finer brush, made from sable or Kolinsky with a perfect point, capable of holding paint while releasing it in a controlled flow. The brush is loaded with paint, not dripping but full, the bristles saturated and brought to the page. The design calls for blue in the background of the illuminated letter, surrounding the gold, creating a field of color that will make the gold appear even more brilliant. You begin at the edge, where gold meets vellum, painting carefully, precisely, ensuring that the blue does not overlap the gold, does not contaminate the burnished surface. The brush glides across the vellum, leaving behind a stroke of blue so intense, so saturated, that it seems to vibrate. The ultramarine is transparent at first, thin enough that the cream color of the vellum shows through, creating a lighter, paler blue. This is expected. Tempera builds in layers. The first coat establishes coverage, creates the foundation. Subsequent coats deepen the color, increase the saturation, achieve the final effect. You work methodically, covering all the areas designated for blue, painting around the gold, around the tiny details of the design, creating a smooth, even coat. The paint dries quickly, the water evaporating, the egg yolk curring, binding the pigment permanently to the vellum. Within minutes, the first coat is dry, ready for the second. You load the brush again, mixing fresh paint on the palette, maintaining the consistency, maintaining the color. The second coat goes over the first, deepening the blue, eliminating the transparency. The vellum disappears beneath the pigment, the cream replaced by azure, by heaven, by the color of divine presence. A third coat completes the work. The blue is now fully saturated, opaque, luminous. It sits on the vellum like a jewel, like a fragment of sky, like concentrated light filtered through infinite depth. Next to the gold, the effect is breathtaking. The warm yellow of the metal and the cool blue of the ultramarine create a harmony, a balance, a visual chord that resonates with something deep in the human eye, in the human soul. But the illumination is not complete. It needs more color, more detail, more life. The design includes flowers and vines, tiny decorative elements that will wind through the margins, connecting the illuminated letter to the text, creating a unified composition. These elements will be painted in red, in green, in white, each color carefully chosen, carefully prepared, carefully applied. The red is vermilion, made from cinnabar, a mercury sulfide ore that is both beautiful and deadly. Cinnabar is mined in Spain, in China, in a few other locations where volcanic activity has created the conditions for its formation. The raw ore is a deep red, crystalline heavy. It must be purified, refined, ground into powder, and this process releases mercury vapor, toxic, capable of causing tremors, madness, death. The work is dangerous, done by specialists who often suffer from mercury poisoning, their hands shaking, their minds deteriorating, their lives shortened by their craft. But the color that emerges from this dangerous process is incomparable, a brilliant orange red, bright and warm, more intense than any organic red, more permanent, more beautiful. Vermilion does not fade in sunlight the way plant-based reds do. It does not darken with age. It remains, century after century, as bright as the day it was applied, a permanent gift to the future. The vermilion arrives at the monastery already ground, already purified, a fine powder the color of blood oranges, of sunrise, of fire. It is mixed with egg tempera in the same way as the ultramarine, creating a paint that flows smoothly, that covers well, that dries to a brilliant matte surface. The application is straightforward, less precious than the ultramarine because vermilion is cheaper, more readily available. You load a fine brush with the red paint and begin to add details to the illumination. Tiny flowers emerge at the tips of curling vines, their petals defined with single brushstrokes, their centers marked with darts of white or yellow. The vines themselves twist and turn, following the margin of the text, creating a decorative border that frames the words without overwhelming them. Each flower is different. Each vine follows its own path, creating variety within repetition, harmony within complexity. The work is meditative, requiring focus but not strain. Your hand moves with practiced ease, the brush an extension of your fingers, the paint flowing exactly where you intend it. Each stroke is deliberate, purposeful, contributing to the whole. The red vermilion glows against the cream vellum, creating warmth, energy, life. Green is added next, a color made from malachite, a copper carbonate ore, ground and mixed with tempera. The green is used for leaves, for stems, for the organic elements of the design. It is cooler than the vermilion, more subdued, providing visual balance, preventing the red from dominating the composition. The green is applied with the same care, the same precision, building the world of the illumination one stroke at a time. White lead, toxic but essential, is used for highlights, for flowers that need to appear pale against the darker background, for details that catch light. The white is opaque, covering completely, creating brightness, creating focal points within the design. A touch of white on a red flower makes it three-dimensional, makes it appear to project from the page. A white vine seems to float above a blue background, seems to exist in a different plane. Other colors are added as needed. Yellow from orpiment, a brilliant but poisonous arsenic sulfide. Pink from a mixture of vermilion and white. Purple from a blend of ultramarine and red. Each color is mixed fresh, used immediately, the palette growing more complex as the illumination develops, as the design comes to life. Hours pass. The light from the window shifts, grows golden, begins to fade. You light a candle, positioning it carefully to avoid creating harsh shadows, to maintain the even illumination you need to see the fine details of your work. The candlelight gives the colors a different quality, warmer, softer, more intimate. The gold seems to glow more intensely in candlelight, the reflection of the flame creating tiny points of brilliance that dance as the flame flickers. The final details are the most delicate, the smallest, the ones that separate good work from great work. You add tiny white dots to the centers of flowers, creating stamens, creating depth. You outline some elements in black ink, using the same iron Gall ink used for the text, giving definition, creating contrast. You add hairline tendrils extending from the main vines, creating movement, suggesting growth, implying life. The brush becomes an extension of your vision, translating what you see in your mind directly onto the vellum without conscious thought. You are not painting anymore. You are channeling, allowing the design to manifest through your hands, through your training, through years of practice that have made the technique invisible, automatic, instinctive. Finally, after hours of concentrated work, after the addition of countless details, after the careful balancing of colors and shapes and values, the illumination is complete. You set down your brush and lean back, seeing the page as a whole for the first time in hours. During the work, you have been focused on individual elements, on single brushstrokes, on tiny details. Now you see the unified composition, the way all the parts work together, the way the gold and blue and red create a visual harmony, the way the decorated initial leads the eye into the text, the way the border frames and supports without competing. The page glows. There is no other word for it. The combination of burnished gold and saturated pigments creates an effect that transcends mere decoration. The page has become a window, a portal, a manifestation of the sacred. The words of Scripture are no longer just words. They are enshrined, glorified, given physical beauty. that reflects their spiritual importance. You are tired. Your eyes ache from the hours of close work in candlelight. Your back is stiff from hunching over the desk. Your hand trembles slightly from the sustained precision required. But there is also satisfaction, deep and quiet, the satisfaction of work well done, of beauty created, of service rendered. The brushes must be cleaned before you can rest. Each one is rinsed in water, the pigment washing away, the bristles restored to their natural color. The ultramarine water is saved, poured into a jar, because even the water contains tiny particles of the precious pigment, too valuable to discard. The other colors are washed down a drain, returned to the earth. The palette is scraped clean, wiped with a damp cloth, prepared for tomorrow's work. The completed page is set on a drying rack, protected from dust, from accidental touch, from any harm. The egg tempera will cure overnight, hardening completely, bonding the pigments permanently to the vellum. In the morning, when you return, the colors will have settled, stabilized, achieved their final appearance. Sometimes colors dry lighter than they appear when wet. Sometimes they dry darker. But with experience, you have learned to predict these changes, to compensate for them when mixing the paint, to achieve exactly the effect you intend. You extinguish the candle, the flame dying with a small trail of smoke that rises and disperses in the darkness. The scriptorium falls into shadow, the only light now coming from the moon outside, pale and cold, filtering through the small windows, creating bars of silver light across the floor. In this light, the gold on the completed page still catches the eye, still glows, even without direct illumination. This is the magic of burnished gold, its ability to capture and reflect even the faintest light, to remain visible in near darkness, to serve as a beacon, a reminder, a promise. You walk to the door of the scriptorium, pausing at the threshold to look back at the room. 6 desks surround the cold brazier. Stacks of vellum rest on shelves. Parts of pigment sit on a work table. Books in various states of completion lie on racks, waiting for their next pages, their next illuminations, their eventual bindings. This room is the heart of the monastery, the place where knowledge is preserved, where beauty is created, where the work of civilization continues regardless of the chaos outside the walls. Tomorrow, there will be more pages to write, more letters to illuminate, more books to complete. The work is endless because the need is endless. Books wear out. Books are lost to fire, to water, to war, to simple neglect. New copies must always be made, the cycle continuing, the knowledge passing from generation to generation through the work of scribes and illuminators, through the patience and skill of those willing to spend their lives in service to the word. But tonight, one more page is complete. One more fragment of beauty has been added to the world. One more window into the divine has been opened. The work is small, perhaps, in the grand scale of things. A single illuminated letter in a single book, in a single monastery, in a remote corner of the world. But multiplied across hundreds of monasteries, across thousands of scribes, across centuries of patient work, these small acts accumulate, these fragments of beauty combine, these individual pages become the foundation of civilization itself. You leave the scriptorium and walk through the darkened corridors of the monastery, your footsteps echoing on the stone floor. Other monks are already asleep, resting before the bells ring for matins in the deep hours of the night. You enter the chapel for a brief prayer, kneeling before the altar, thanking God for the skill in your hands, for the materials you work with, for the opportunity to serve in this particular way. The chapel is dark, except for a single lamp burning before the tabernacle, a small flame that is never allowed to go out, a symbol of eternal presence, of constant vigilance, of light persisting in darkness. You watch this flame for a moment, seeing in it a reflection of your own work, the small light of beauty and knowledge that you help to maintain, to feed, to keep burning against the night. Then to the dormitory, to your narrow bed, to the simple blanket and straw mattress. You lie down, close your eyes, and sleep comes quickly, carrying you into dreams of gold and blue, of letters flowing across pages, of books without end, of light preserved and multiplied and carried forward into an unknown future. In the dream, you are standing in a great library, larger than any that exists in the real world, its shelves stretching infinitely in all directions, filled with books, millions of books, each one illuminated, each one glowing with gold and color. You walk among these books, running your hands along their spines, feeling the texture of leather bindings, smelling the familiar scent of vellum and ink and age. The books whisper to you, speaking in languages you don't know but somehow understand, telling stories, sharing wisdom, preserving knowledge. And you realize that every book in this infinite library was made by hands like yours, by people whose names are forgotten but whose work remains. Each illuminated page, each carefully formed letter, each application of gold and pigment represents hours of someone's life, freely given, dedicated to something larger than themselves. The books are not just objects. They are the accumulated devotion of generations, the crystallized effort of thousands of individuals, each one contributing their small part to the preservation of the light. The dream fades, and you sleep deeper, beyond images, beyond thought, in the pure rest that comes after honest labor, after work that aligns with purpose, after a day spent in service to something eternal. Morning comes too soon, the bells ringing for lauds, calling the community to prayer. You rise, dress, join the others in the chapel. The offices of the day proceed in their familiar rhythm. Prayers, mass, breakfast, work, more prayers, more work, evening prayers, sleep. The cycle continues, unchanging, providing structure, providing meaning, providing the framework within which your life unfolds. But within this structure, there is infinite variety, infinite challenge, infinite opportunity for growth and beauty. Each page is different. Each illumination presents new problems to solve, new opportunities to explore. The basic techniques remain the same. The gold, the pigments, the brushes, the methods handed down through generations. But their application varies, responding to the specific needs of each book, each text, each moment of creation. You return to the scriptorium and take your place at the desk. The completed page from yesterday sits on the drying rack, the colors fully cured, the gold gleaming in the morning light. You examine it critically, looking for flaws, for areas that could be improved. The work is good, you decide. Not perfect. Nothing made by human hands is perfect. But good, honest, worthy. The book it belongs to is one step closer to completion. You select a new sheet of vellum from the stack, carry it to your desk, position it on the slanted surface. The familiar weight, the familiar texture, the familiar promise of blank potential. You reach for your quill, dip it in the ink, and begin to write. The words flow from your hand, black letters marching across the cream surface, filling the ruled lines, transforming emptiness into meaning. The work continues. The work never stops. The work is eternal, or as close to eternal as anything in this transient world can be. Books will outlast buildings. Books will outlast kingdoms. Books will carry the words, the knowledge, the beauty forward into centuries you cannot imagine, into a future you will never see. But you do not need to see it. You know it exists. You have faith in the permanence of what you create, in the endurance of vellum and ink and gold, in the human hunger for knowledge and beauty that ensures these books will be valued, preserved, copied again when they eventually decay, the cycle continuing forever or until the end of time, whichever comes first. This is the work of the medieval illuminator, not glamorous, not celebrated, often anonymous, the names of the creators lost, remembered only through their work, through the beauty they left behind, but essential, vital, the foundation upon which the cathedral of civilization is built, one illuminated page at a time, one carefully applied layer of gold, one perfectly ground pigment, one patient hour in a quiet room, writing in light, preserving the soul of the world. The candle burns low as evening approaches. The winter sun sets early, and you work by candlelight again, the flame casting dancing shadows on the wall, the light warm and golden, sympathetic to the colors on the page. The illumination you're working on now is nearly complete, just a few final details remaining, a few last touches of white and gold, a few hairline flourishes that will tie the composition together. Your hand moves almost automatically, guided by years of practice, by muscle memory so deep it feels like instinct. The brush dips into the paint, rises to the page, makes its mark. Dip, rise, mark. The rhythm is meditative, peaceful, a form of prayer without words, a connection to the divine through the act of making beauty, of serving truth, of preserving light. The final stroke is completed. You set down the brush and examine the page. The illuminated initial glows in the candlelight, the gold reflecting the flame, the blue deep and rich, the red vibrant and warm. The decorative border winds around the text, delicate and intricate, supporting without overwhelming. The black letters of the text sit in perfect rows, clear and legible, ready to carry their message across the centuries. The page is finished. It glows in the candlelight, shining in the darkness of the library. You clean your brushes for the last time today, watching the colored water swirl in the bowl, the pigments washing away, the bristles returning to their natural state. The palette is wiped clean. The gold leaf book is closed and returned to its locked cabinet. The vellum stack is covered with a protective cloth. The ink horn is sealed. The quill is cleaned and set in its holder. You gather the completed pages, all the work of the past weeks, and carry them carefully to the bookbindery, where they will eventually be sewn into gatherings, the gatherings sewn into sections, the sections bound between wooden boards covered in leather, the whole protected with brass clasps and corners, transformed from individual pages into a complete book, a codex, a permanent repository of knowledge and beauty. The knowledge is safe for another 1,000 years, encoded in iron gall ink on calfskin vellum, illuminated with gold and ultramarine and vermilion, protected by the skills and devotion of generations of scribes and illuminators, by the commitment to preserving the light of learning against the darkness of ignorance and chaos. You walk to the chapel for Compline, the final prayers of the day. The other monks are there, their voices rising in the ancient words, the same words that have been chanted in this place for centuries, that will be chanted for centuries to come. Your voice joins theirs, part of the community, part of the tradition, part of the unbroken chain that connects past to present to future. After prayers, you return to the dormitory one last time, to your narrow bed, to rest and sleep and dream. Tomorrow there will be more pages, more letters, more illuminations. The work continues. The work is eternal. The work is light made visible, words made permanent, beauty offered as a gift to the future, to generations yet unborn, to readers who will open these books centuries from now and see the gold still shining, the colors still bright, the letters still clear, and know that someone once cared enough to spend their life preserving the light. And as the gold leaf catches the last flicker of the candle, shining in the darkness of the library, the book is closed. The work is done. Sleep well.